Chapter 4. James Macaulay. I woke up to the sound of dawn chorus. A chaffinch, maybe a tawny owl. It took me a while to register where I was and what personality Sam Wood was implicated in. I first appeared to be some neutral, indifferent human being. I could be any human, a stranger, simply a human gaze. And it was only when my human security system caught on that my subjectivity, and all the emotions that come with being a social subject, flooded back, giving me back my name, my past, and whatever bundle of feelings I had at my last recognizable instance, for better or for worse. A widow had lost her husband 5 years ago, and the painful memories when she realizes who she is and her unique predicament comes exactly 3 seconds after she wakes up every morning, and exactly 2 seconds after she has been distracted by anything powerful enough to engross her. A film, sex, a piece of music, a conversation with someone else, etc. The seductive lobotomy of oneself can be found within these encounters, these distractions. Yet I believe the same ambient moment can be found through a different aesthetic approach, focused outward upon the typically dull, boring objects of the everyday. This is the experience I was having at present in Boston, in Parks Court University car park at 6:15 a.m. I see many signs giving students and visitors directions to certain areas of the university. I see bins with keyholes in the back for when they need to be emptied and refilled again and again. I look at the perfect gravel around the edges of the car park. I wonder if the gravel was naturally formed through the erosion of rocks, or whether it was produced at a quarry near here, Boston's very own Bostonian gravel. I think about whether any of the materials that went into making this car park had been imported from other countries, whether this specific gravel was transported by mammoth trucks or carried across water. If water, then perhaps by a ferry floating along whilst crew members smoked cigarettes and talked about their families. Perhaps the gravel was found in a stream, a river, or a beach somewhere exotic. It is in these moments of insanely boring inquiry to some people where I find my inner peace. It is in the conversations and transportations of inanimate objects embroiled in the human world of equipment that supports and actualizes them, where I find my solace. I look above, out through my windshield, and trace the base of a street light up towards its bulb, finding the markings of a brand embossed halfway up. I try and find stillness in the world and make that my hiding place. I find the serenity right in front of my eyes, like the cold light of day. I stop believing in depth and instead affirm the history of many surfaces, the narrative of every grain of sand. Can a man ever amount to the beauty of the things he sees and experiences? I have never moved forward. Instead, I dig my feet in or hide away whilst the river of time cascades all around and over me. I am the same as I was when I was 13, anxious and unable to comprehend the world. But at least there is always something new for my eyes to touch, and miraculously always some mutter of mine to keep me occupied. No longer than 30 seconds had passed since I had awoken, yet an incoming message noise bleeped and blipped on my phone. It was an email from our very own Professor James Macaulay. Dear Sam, if I may, what a coincidence that you should send me this email. I was just thinking about Ben the other day when passing the wine section in the supermarket. I have just returned from a conference on Carl Jung and synchronicity in Durham. No one knew what they were on about. Everyone appeared too modern and dull scientific to really get Jung. He was a mystic, don't you know? Yes, I thought of Ben back in the school days, his love of birds, the day he set fire to a tablecloth because he was bored of the conversation around it. I went to the supermarket on the way back from the Jung conference to get some bits in for me and Angela, and spotted a Heinrich Hartel, one of his favorite wines. On the label, a beautiful bird was depicted, flying off into some other representational dimension, whilst a table was laid and fully spread with wine, bread, cheese, and cold meats, all underneath this beautiful red Austrian tablecloth. Funny how all these elements came together in meaningful coincidence, isn't it? I shan't be of much help to you, I'm afraid. I knew Ben well at school, but it became very turbulent after that. Do you know that it was Ben who got me into all this synchronicity stuff? The first day I met him, I had been sent to wait in reception for my mother so that she could give me my school shoes as I had worn my trainers to school. I had gotten away with it before. Half an hour passed. I don't think she really cared about it, and Ben walked in half asleep and was asked to sign in at reception and comment on why he was so late. Apparently, he had written that time was just a construct and cannot be measured absolutely. He must have been reading some crazy book that he had found in his dad's shed or something. Anyway, the next day the whole school knew about this comment as it had circulated through the staff and then the students. He was sent to the headmaster's office, which was incredible enough as the headmaster had time for nobody, especially students, and everyone was secretly waiting to see if Ben would come out alive. When his visit to the headmaster's office was over, I was one of the first people to ask him what had happened. He told me that the headmaster had poured him a nice cup of tea and had asked him what other theories he might have had about the nature of space-time. When I say our relationship had become turbulent, I really mean to say that I had fallen in love with him. When Ben was 16, he had bought this old beaten-up car, a rather ordinary-looking Renault Alliance, and most days from then on we would skip school and listen to radio shows in it, especially Just a Minute, or any opera we could get our hands on. He didn't have a license, so he would take a 4-minute drive in his car, kept in his parents' empty garage, to the nearest forest at about 5 a.m. every morning so that he wouldn't get caught out. I would catch a bus, the 151, to the nearest stop where Ben was, and we would share my packed lunch, and sometimes we'd get stoned. I remember the 151 days fondly. We had absolutely no guilt in skipping school or what our parents would think or what anyone would think for that matter. We had somehow made our own world that just the two of us existed in, helped by the mundane verbal ambling of whomever was with us on the radio that day. We were never bored. Ben used to say that only boring people get bored. We felt as though it were our duty to sit and watch the world go by. What's the point of doing anything anyway, right? February crept in, and toward the end of that month there was a blizzard that covered the whole of our town in 6 inches of snow. I remember vividly standing outside Ben's car at an opening in the forest. I was catching snowflakes on my tongue whilst Ben tried to make a snowman. I remember asking him to see if he could catch the snowflakes on my tongue before they melted away. I encouraged him harder and harder to touch my tongue with his tongue. Ben knew at that moment what had happened, and he was so cool he didn't even act awkward about it. He just stopped responding to my pleas and went back into the car to listen to the radio. After that, things were never the same. To be honest, I'm glad they never were. He became distant from me and started hanging out with Brian soon after that. He was bad news, Brian. But I'm sure he'll have told you all about that. With no Benji, I started focusing my energy back on my studies at Long Sands Academy School. My brother told me that if you did well at school and got into college, you get to meet loads of girls at parties, and most of them put out, and you can listen to Led Zeppelin whenever you want. I wasn't too bothered about the girls' part, but Led Zeppelin is great. I scraped a pass in my psychology and religious studies lessons, but needed 3 passes to get into 6th form and then college. I needed to get out of my hometown, which for me was basically Benji town, and I just about started to realize that I wanted to be an academic. I remember going to school in order to collect my grades. I remember seeing that I had only passed 2 subjects, yet still heading to the assembly hall in order to enroll at 6th form. When the tutors saw that I had only 2 passes, I did what any independent 17-year-old would do. I burst into tears right there in the school assembly hall. After a minute of vacant professorial stares, Mrs. Saunders said that she would accept 2 passes if I performed in every school musical up until I graduated. Of course I accepted. What else is there to say? You don't want to hear about myself. You want to hear about Ben. Everyone wants to know about Ben. I met Angela in my second year of college. She studied physics. We are now happily married, and at present she is studying the crystal structures and morphology of snowflakes. Yours sincerely, James Macaulay. P.S. Please forgive me. I am not against you visiting me, but I feel much more comfortable writing this kind of stuff to you. Writing is, after all, my vocation. In general, I feel more comfortable writing than talking, with my eye to the ground as opposed to the eyes of another in front of me reacting to every word that comes out of my mouth. I finished Professor Macaulay's email with a mixture of happiness and sadness. I was happy that I received his email. It meant that I was on the right track. Things were happening, and it would only be a matter of time until I could hunt down all the people, places, and experiences that made up Ben's life. I was sad, however, because I felt as though he had taken me down a dead end, closing all further correspondences that we could have had over a cup of coffee at his university, or maybe at the supermarket he had talked about. I could email him back, but I felt as though the concise tone of his email suggested that there was nothing more to be said. I felt as though he had spent the last 10 years getting over that bingy period in his life, and he had no desire to reflect further upon it at present, or ever again. Something was beginning to make sense, though. After the interrogation of Ben's suicide at the police station, no one tried to contact me, and I believe no one tried to contact one another. There were no tributes thrown for Benji over the last 2 years, and I feared that all of his so-called friends couldn't wait to see the back of him. Was Benji just a bad dream everyone wanted to forget about? Did they all conspire to drive him to death as an act of revenge for all the strange situations he had put them in? Either way, something wasn't right here. My opinion there and then was that Benji's allure was precisely that he could put people into difficult situations where they were forced to see themselves in a different light. Professor Macaulay may not want to revisit the past, but there was no doubt that he was in debt to Benji for teaching him a thing or two. Benji has had the same effect on me. His email has put me in a position where I have left my partner and taken to the open road in search of things I do not even know I'm looking for. At that moment, a million questions poured out of my mouth, present only to the inanimate objects within the confines of my car. What book did Benji borrow from his father in order to come up with such a philosophical excuse for his lack of punctuality at school? Who's Bad Brian? Did Benji continue skipping school after James soon saw sense and continued his studies? Who is Carl Jung? I looked at my phone and saw that I had a missed call from Isabel. All my prior duties as a loving boyfriend and as a denizen who participated in his society flooded back. I thought about all the objects in our house, the dead skin cells congealing on my guitar strings, the dust molecules multiplying on my record player needle, the spider who lives under the fourth shelf of my bookshelf, the photo of myself and Isabel on vacation in New York that falls off the fridge every time we close the freezer drawer, the 2 toothbrushes in the bathroom that always look like they are kissing each other, with their bristles touching and leaning on one another, leaving a strange milky residue inside the toothbrush pot. I decided to ring Isabel, forgetting about how early in the morning it was. After several rings, it went to voicemail, and so I left her a message. Isabel, surprise, it's me. I received a missed call from you. I hope you're okay. I hope the audition went well. I just realized that you can put bottles of red wine in the fridge without me being there to tell you off. If you like it cold, why don't you just drink rosé? Anyway, last night's performance was great, really interesting. A musician named James Macaulay, playing a mainly flamenco repertoire, some nice Paco de Lucia numbers, nice bit of Tarondo, very graceful. Wish you were here, really, Izzy. I'll call you again when I get a chance. Love you. Okay, bye. I hung up and placed my phone on the front passenger seat beside me. All this technology aiming to bring us together, to share an idea, experience, or memory within an instant, but really one is only left speaking to ghosts or simply themselves. I wondered how many people had been severely affected by friendship. For sure, we could all try and involve ourselves with the celestial rhythms of philosophical research, James, questions far more important than merely the world stage where we act out our own private and social dramas. But the encounter of a friend, one who you truly admire, this is an encounter very much like love, where you are left trying to reconcile this other with yourself and your own ideology. When this other is not reconciled, appropriated, or subordinated, then you are left with something common to all Benjamin's friends, a form of loathing. We all knew, or are beginning to realize, that Benjamin's essence, his being, if you will, brims with so much self-confidence and definiteness that it plays on the victim's mind. How dare he exist? Is he challenging me in some volatile manner? Of course, there are many people who purport to contain such a power, but are really at war with themselves and loathe themselves, but we are talking about a much higher being altogether, aren't we? I myself have no time for the former, unless they are enduring that painful process we have all been through called adolescence. I refreshed my inbox for any signs of life from the other 6 recipients of Benji's email. Nothing. To be fully aware of the myriad lives existing outside our own private existence is somewhat impossible. The idea is there, within stories, music, art, theater, the news, television programs, etc., but the experience is inaccessible. I know theoretically that Bad Brian, who I assume is the one and only Brian Rose, Terry Organ, Celine at Night, etc., are all with us. They are all living in their own world where their values seem more prominent because they are living through them and making them. Yet I can only ever think of such independent, sentient beings as characters in a story, pawns in a game, or at best, my ambivalent friends. What happens next in Sam Wood's story, I thought to myself. Long Sands Academy School was the answer. James was good enough to tell us the name of the school he and Benji had attended. The possibility of digging up old yearbooks, speaking to his old teachers, if they were still there, if they were still alive, of walking down the same streets as Ben, of stopping and tying my shoelaces in the same spot, of walking past his house accidentally, of finding these woods that James talked about, that was enough for me to go on for sure. I turned on my laptop and found only one Long Sands Academy School, located in St. Knots, Cambridgeshire. This had to be the place. It was the 6th form as well. It taught all the subjects James studied. And, without sounding too much like James, there was a strange synchronicity here. The school's 4 houses were named Rutherford, Moore, Eliot, and Britton, after Ernest Rutherford, Henry Moore, Thomas Stearns Eliot, and Benjamin Britten. Benjamin Britten and his music were a topic Benjamin, my Benjamin, and I talked about obsessively when we were not embroiled in difficult guitar techniques. Note, Benjamin Britten's string quartets 2 and 3 are definitely worth listening to if you haven't already. In this new opening in the Benjamin Flu story, I couldn't help but let out a short laugh. Cambridge would take at least 2 hours from Boston, so what else to do but temporarily block out the classical guitar motifs playing around in my head and put on the sunlit perfection of Boccionieri.